Hi everyone, I'm Associate Professor Sarah Bice and welcome back to Globalization and Governance. In today's meeting, we're going to discuss a few things leading on from our earlier beginning lecture. So we started off on Monday with ideas about globalization, what that is, what that means, and today we're going to begin exploring how is globalization and changes to public policy and public administration affecting what it means to be a 21st century public servant. So today we're going to look at public administration with a global perspective. We're going to explore a little bit some of the Western theories of policymaking and how those are applied successfully or perhaps unsuccessfully in non-Western spaces. And I'll also ask you to participate in making some suggestions for potential cases or areas of interest for our future work together in the middle of the course. So hopefully you're ready. Grab a drink if you need it. Make yourself comfortable. Remember that because you're watching online, you can always pause, take notes, look things up, do what you need, but let's get learning. So, a reminder of what we need to do between now and Monday, because I'm the kind of gal who likes to plan ahead. So, what you're going to want to do today is really digest our lecture video, the readings and the materials. Also, I will provide a video about assessment task number 1, and that will give you some details as to what's expected for that assessment task. And we'll work on that together in next week's live online discussion forum. The other thing that we're doing now is producing a few technology introduction videos, and you can find those in our course website through our YouTube channel or on Tsinghua Cloud. The important thing that I'm introducing today is we are going to try a class Padlet. Padlet is a free online collaborative software that allows you to post your written, video recorded, or audio responses to the discussion questions and activities that I give you at the end of each lecture. So instead of posting your responses on WeChat or in the RAIN classroom, we're going to try this Padlet board because it's a really great free collaborative software and it gives you a lot of freedom and creativity. It's also the space now where you can post any content related questions, ideas, or resources that you would like to ask me or your other colleagues in the class, or that you just want to share. So there is now a video, which is how to use Padlet. It's about 3 minutes long and it's available online. So check that out, scan the QR code, and get started in our Padlet sandbox. I feel like I'm on a television show. So last time on Globalization and Governance, a recap. Our first meeting, we really worked together in our live online discussion forum to meet our colleagues, to find out who's in the room, who's going to be joining us and learning together. And one of the things I want to remind us is that even online, it's our responsibility together to create a very safe learning space. And so that means that all questions are good questions, they're valid, they're legitimate. I've said before, there are no right answers. But what we really want to do together is bring not only our mutual respect, but our critical curiosity. So I really encourage you throughout this class and whenever we have opportunities, either in the Padlet collaborative forum or in our online discussion forum, to ask questions, to be critical, and really come prepared for discussion. And that means do the readings, watch these lectures, take notes, think about them, and be there, be ready to have a good discussion. The other thing I'll say is it's so important, even though we're not meeting together physically, get to know your colleagues. WeChat's a terrific tool. You guys can set up Zoom meetings between each other. Invite each other for conversations because you can have a coffee over Skype. So I really, really recommend get to know your colleagues. It's an invaluable part of your master's degree. Some of the things we talked about in lecture 1 in our live discussion forums were the importance of the different values and perspectives that people bring, being from all different parts of the world. And I've mentioned that we have students from as far away as Brazil all the way across to Fiji. So we really are a globalized course. The other thing we learned from Monday's lecture is that Wicked problems are really, really difficult and complicated, but they also often represent moral or ethical dilemmas. And when we talk about climate change a bit later in the term, I think we'll see how wicked problems can also present moral issues. Indeed, even back in 2007, Al Gore and the Australian Prime Minister at the time, Kevin Rudd, declared climate change to be the world's greatest moral challenge. The other thing that's important to recommend or to think about is that individuals' backgrounds and experiences will really shape how they understand public policy and governance and theory. And that's true for all of us in the class, but it's also true for those who are writing the scholarship that we're reading. So whenever you're reading a piece of academic literature, a media article, or something online, take a moment to think, who is writing this and from what perspective or vantage point are they coming? It's a really important thing to do. So just a reminder about wicked problems. Wicked problems represent contested issues with no easy solution. One of the reasons that they're wicked is because it's really difficult to know where to start or what to test. They're things that are novel and unique. Many public policy problems related to globalization and governance are wicked problems, but not every difficult policy problem is a wicked problem. And that's something I'll encourage you to think about. We also talked a bit about convergence and divergence in relation to globalization, and you had a reading from Kishore Mahbubani where he sets out three potential kind of approaches to globalization, and the one that he was most adamant about at the time that he was doing that writing was this very optimistic idea that we are on the march to modernity and that everything's going to be terrific and we're going to have this amazing, he described it as a huge ship where all the different countries of the world are all kind of sailing in the same direction off into the sunset. So that was his ideas of 2015. But another option for globalization is this notion of a retreat to the fortress. And what's interesting is that even in the time between Mahbubani releasing that book and now, despite his kind of notions that we were going to march toward modernity, what we're actually seeing in practice is a rise in populism, a rise in nationalism in many countries, and what would signify isolationism or a retreat to the fortress. And this has been quite surprising. The final point there, and we'll talk about this more in our next lecture together when we get into some of the theory around governance, is this notion that globalization is not globalization at all, it's actually a triumph of the West. So in this idea, we have Francis Fukuyama's The End of History, or the notion that liberal democratic government systems are the ultimate system, or the kind of teleologic finality, if you will, of political systems that we should all be aiming towards. And actually, globalization is convergence in the form of the triumph of the West through the spread of liberal democracy. So we could debate that one at length, and I look forward to that. We also asked you at the end of the last lecture, well, what is public policy? How do you understand that? And we got quite a few responses, and I'm going to encourage all of you who haven't responded yet to add your responses to the Padlet. But Natasha said, well, actually it's an art and it's a science, and it's about making decisions to impact populations positively. That's a great succinct definition, Natasha, so thank you for sharing that one. Anna wrote, and now of course my video is covering this up, but Anna wrote and said, a field of study that enables us to adopt a series of measures whose aim is to improve the environment we live in, with particular attention to societal well-being, we're going to say economic growth or economic prioritization, and also natural protection. So she also there has kind of included the social, the economic, and the environmental. That's terrific. Thank you, Anna, for that contribution. Hikmat noted a very common public policy theory, which I think here you're referring to Kingdon's policy windows. He said, good public policy process requires to open an agenda window. And indeed, Kingdon's policy windows today remains a very, very popular theory in public policy. And Terry said, well, actually, it's about the governing body's position and by extension, its will over its constituents and the land that it holds. So here, there's a really interesting notion that public policy is both bounded by a governmental or political system, but also geographically. And that's something we're really starting to question in this course because that is certainly true and has been the case historically in public policy scholarship, that we think about public policy as a domestically bounded sphere. What we're starting to see, though, and this is why globalization and governance is to me a fascinating topic, is that the very notion and construct of what public policy is shifting as globalization progresses, whether it's a retreat to the fortress, a triumph of the West, or a march to modernity. If you would like to share your ideas about what you think public policy is, and I'd love for you to, and also it's part of your participation grade, so this is strongly encouraged, you can scan this QR code here and join our collaborative class Padlet, which is a free online collaborative software. I don't work for Padlet, I just feel like I'm saying that a lot lately. But scan the QR code, go into the Padlet, and you can provide your definitions and see what your classmates are saying, and you can also comment or like their ideas. The other question that we asked after the last lecture was, tell us a bit about how you think globalization is influencing convergence or divergence. How are these factors working together? So what I've done here is to compile and also interpret some of your responses into this lovely table, which is very text heavy, but let's go through it a bit. I think some of the most interesting things, and this comes up for me year on year when I teach this course, is that we will often see things in the convergence column that are mirrored or exactly the same in divergence. So for instance, we might see things like religion, which is kind of down in the third pink row. Religion can be something that helps people to converge. It really creates a sense of unity. So you might see, for instance, convergence across a variety of Islamic countries where they have that shared religious interests and morals and principles. At the same time, religion can also be something that leads to divergence, and we see that as well. So there's something very complex and very interesting going on with issues of convergence and divergence in globalization, where sometimes the factors that bring us together are also the factors that pull us apart. Ulrich Beck, who's a sociologist who I've mentioned before in some of our online discussion forums, he writes about globalization and has done so since the late 1990s. And one of the things that he talks about in terms of globalization is this notion of the glocal. So that's the global combined with the local. And he gives this horrendous example because he's a German guy. So of course he, I guess, eats a lot of sausages. His example is of a Hawaiian veal sausage. So whether or not you're interested to eat that, that's probably by the by, but Ulrich Beck says that is a classic example of globalization where you've taken something very local, this notion of a German sausage, and you have globalized it in Hawaii. So maybe you'll see Ulrich in Malibu. Actually, Malibu's not in Hawaii. It's okay, guys. I need to drink more coffee. So, what does this mean for public administration? Let's think together. Today, we're going to think about how do we understand public policy and our roles as colleagues working in or with public administration? What are the taken for granted concepts that underpin public policy work? And what do 21st century public administration roles actually look like? So if you're currently in a public administration role or thinking of moving into one, what can you expect those jobs to look like in this 21st century? The other question that I'd like us to think about today and also to discuss in our upcoming online live forum is how has public administration been shaped by Western ideas and perspectives, particularly given that we are a group of colleagues and scholars studying public policy from within Asia. So some of the things we'll also consider are what have been the particular approaches or public administration theories that have most influenced this situation, where public administration is largely defined and guided by Western scholarship. And we're going to talk a bit and introduce an idea of new public management. So if you've heard about NPM before, that's terrific, and you can just sit back and feel like an expert. Don't fast forward though, watch the video. If you're new to new public management, we'll give you a bit of an overview. So I often ask this, it's not a trick question. I know the course is called Globalization and Governance, but what is this course about? For me, this course is about the macro. So really thinking through these big picture conceptual ideas. What is globalization? What is public policy? How do we deal with that? But it's also about the micro. And so today we're really going to focus in on these worker ants, the public administrators who do the job of public administration. Before we do that, though, we really need to have a context to understand why and how public service or public administration roles, particularly in the West, but also in a number of developing countries, why they have been shaped the way that they have. And the best theoretical tool we have to understand that is something that was really put together by Christopher Hood back in 1991 called New Public Management. New public management has become so popular in public policy scholarship that it's almost like a religion in itself. And indeed, Christopher Hood, who's the kind of inventor of this notion, says, like most divinities, the core of new public management is somewhat mystical in essence. And so the very creator of this theory is saying to us, actually, it's become bigger than itself. And NPM has just been used in many instances to describe a variety of things that maybe weren't always what he, as the author, originally intended NPM to be. But what are some of the foundations of new public management? What does it commonly include? The first is that NPM is very focused, as the name would suggest, on management. And so what it attempted to do in the early 1990s was to bring in more corporate and business-like approaches to the public sector. So there was a real push for budget transparency. There was an increase in the use of performance indicators. So anyone who has key performance indicators or KPIs in your current job role where you're being measured against particular objectives that you have to meet probably annually. If you're in the public service, this is a representation or a manifestation of new public management. They were really interested in principal-agent relationships and in hierarchies within government. So NPM is all about networks and links to incentivize good performance. So what did we have prior to new public management? And this is where teaching online, I really miss my whiteboard because when I'm in the classroom, I love to write stuff up and I love to get your ideas. And if we were in the classroom right now, I would say to you, what is a bureaucrat? You're like, what? What do you mean? What's a bureaucrat? What is a bureaucrat? What do you think of when you think of bureaucracy? Do you think of like some guy at a desk with reams of paper? Have you seen the movie Zootopia? Do you think about when they go to the Department of Motor Vehicles and behind the counter is a sloth? And the sloth is so slow and he has so much paperwork and a stamp, which for those of us living in China, I think we have a lot of empathy for the stamping. But the idea of a bureaucrat is that this is an individual who is highly specialized, who is very expert in a particular area, and who is able to follow very detailed, complex processes specific to their role. You know, when we think of the bureaucracy, we often think of it as process oriented. We often think of it as something that's slow, and we think of it as something that's hierarchical. When Christopher Hood wrote about new public management, he was writing very much in response or reaction to traditional bureaucracy, which gave rise to a type of public servant that we call the technocrat. So, technocrats are these individuals who are so expert in a very niche or specialized role that we are fully kind of dependent on them to do that one thing, but conversely, they can do that one thing only. Okay? And New Public Management said actually, what we need are less technocrats and more generalists. And so, New Public Management led, we saw a lot more outsourcing of the public service to consultants and contractors. For those of you who've studied business degrees or who are familiar with kind of four quadrant matrices, this particular graph may help to explain a little bit. So public administration, where they started from, was very much in the upper right-hand quadrant. So it had a high density of rules and it had a high insulation of the public service from the private sector. Okay, so it was in the upper right-hand quadrant. What New Public Management attempts to do is to shift public service away from that bureaucracy, from all of those really tight rules and that technocracy, into an area where it is more mixing with the private sector. So we're seeing more transparent budgets, we're seeing more commissioning or outsourcing of public service tasks to private sector consultants, and we're seeing a decrease in the number of technocrats, people who are very technically suited to a specific area, and a rise in the number of generalist public servants. So if you remember nothing else about NPM, remember that it's about performance and incentives. It adopts business-related processes for public management. It moves us from technocrats towards generalists, and it has resulted in an outsourcing of traditionally held public service roles to private sector consultants. So why do we care about NPM then? Okay, so pre-NPM, we had this list of things that I just noted there. The other thing that was really important about a pre-NPM phase of public policy was this notion that public servants were public servants for life. And in China, we still have this today. There's this idea amongst Chinese public servants of what's colloquially known as the iron rice bowl. So you get this job and you got to stick in the job, but it is going to feed you and care for you for life. This was also a public service model that was incredibly common throughout the West until the rise of New Public Management. And so with NPM, we've seen this increase in managerialism, a shift towards generalists. Some people call it a post-bureaucracy world. So if you want to sound really smart at your next dinner party, you can say, well, now that we're in the post-bureaucracy, we'll give you some other phrases like that throughout this course to increase your intelligence quota at parties. We've seen more outsourcing and commissioning. We're seeing an increase in competition. So previously, where public service was deemed something that was, kind of taking care of itself, we now see a lot more competition with performance management and incentivization, and also a kind of disaggregation of roles across departments. So in many countries, you can see this manifest in the creation of these kind of mega departments or mega industries. In Australia, for instance, very recently we got a new government in at the Commonwealth level, and they created a mega department which is across industry, trade, and environment. So good luck to you if you're the minister of that. Right, so I just spent like 7 minutes telling you about New Public Management, and now I'm going to ask you this question. Well, is NPM dead? Because everybody who writes a theory wants to be the person who has the next theory. So from Christopher Hood's time in 1991 to today, we now have a whole series of public policy scholars who are saying, hey, NPM was a great idea, but it's had its time and actually it's dead. And now we are into the era of digital era governance. So Helen Margetts, who is a very fascinating policy scholar and someone I would encourage you to look up. She and a number of colleagues in 2005 argued that the age of NPM had come and gone. And actually, what we're seeing today is the emergence of a new era of public policy and management called digital era governance. So here we're seeing the integration of IT with public service roles. We're seeing more holistic approaches to public service, and in some ways that could be manifest in these kind of mega departments that I mentioned before. But they're also talking in terms of what they call needs-based governance. So for those of you who have an interest in the use of IT, the way in which technology might be used to respond better to citizens' needs, you might really like to look up digital era governance and have a think about whether you believe that NPM is dead. Are we moving towards e-government or digitized administration? So this is an interesting idea, and I'm pretty sure that I've put the link to Helen's paper as a recommended reading next to this week's lecture in the slides or on the course website. Anyway, my response to you is NPM dead? Well, who knows? But whatever we call this next era of public administration and scholarship, we most definitely know that the work of public servants or administrators on a day-to-day basis, their lived experience is really changing. And that's what I'd like to spend the rest of the time talking with you about today. So we're really now going down and zooming in to this micro level to think about how these broad level globalized changes in public management approaches and scholarship and theory and practice, what do they mean for those of us who do public service? What do they mean for the people who work in and with the public service on a day-to-day role? So some very good colleagues of mine who are also named Helen. This is at the top, Helen Dickinson, and at the bottom, my very dear colleague, Professor Helen Sullivan, who's also the director of the Crawford School for Public Policy at the Australian National University. Helen and Helen got together a few years ago, and they have written a piece of work that I think is really important and really forward-thinking. And what they've tried to do is to imagine what the 21st century public service looks like, how it's changing, and what public administration roles are likely to become. The other reason, and I'll do this throughout the course, the other reason that I put their photos here and I spend a little bit of time talking about them is I think it's really important for us all to understand that there are a variety of different people producing public policy scholarship, particularly when we come from a field which has traditionally been dominated by white male Anglo-Saxon academics. There are a lot of diverse perspectives now entering the field with a lot of really great ideas, and these two women are certainly ahead of the pack. So what do Helen and Helen suggest are the big challenges for the 21st century public service? They've named three. First, they really believe that 21st century public service is very much at what they call a frontier of change. It's often our public administrators who are at this very front line. And we can see that now actually with the health crisis. It's our public servants, those in the health field, those in the medical profession, many of whom are employed directly by government, who are at the frontier of change here. And they may also be often at the frontier of crisis. If we look in Australia, very recently, we've had the most devastating bushfire season in recorded history. And many of the individuals who have been the frontier of that challenge or change are public servants, people employed directly by government. We're also starting to see amongst the 21st century public service, instead of that iron rice bowl and people filling a technocratic role, which is very specifically defined and doing the same thing for many years, public servants are starting to look more like their counterparts in the corporate world, and they're developing what we call portfolio careers. Many of you are younger than I am, and I can tell you that on average, it is expected that you will have approximately 32 different roles in the course of your career. And that's very, very different to previous decades and previous generations. The final thing that Helen and Helen point out in terms of major challenges for 21st century public service are that we're seeing an increase in citizen expectations about what public service is and will and should do. And this is really compounded by the capacity of citizens now to be able to directly contact or critique their public administrators, particularly through social media. It does have a major impact. So some of the specific challenges for public administration then are that we're facing increased problem complexity, but at the same time, there's a lot of resource and financial constraints around the roles. Many governments around the world are tightening their financial belts. Technology, especially using new and integrated forms of IT, is becoming both an opportunity and a challenge for contemporary public administrators, as well as that notion of a portfolio career. So having this employment flexibility and a lot of choice. And we're seeing new changes to industrial relations models as well. In a lot of countries, including the UK, the US, and Australia, we're seeing an increase in telecommuting, for instance. So people have very fluid workplaces and support for flexible work environments. There's no longer this kind of notion of a 9 to 5 public service. So I'm going to just mention this briefly and in the interest of time, because we're at about the half-hour mark and I'd like to finish up for you within about the next 7 minutes. But you may, if you want to really explore this idea of problem complexity and what is the context in which today's public servants are working, Thomas Piketty, who is a French economist, a couple of years ago, he came out with this book, Capital in the 21st Century, and he's tried to help us to understand how economics and the financial future is likely to be shaped. So if political economy or economics are of interest to you, I highly encourage this book. For those of you who are not that into that kind of stuff, the book is 816 pages, but if you click this link in these slides, The Economist has very helpfully summarized Capital in 4 paragraphs. So there you go, that's a tip. So, who are today's public servants and what do they do? Helen and Helen thought quite a lot about 21st century public service, and they've said that what we see today are public service roles shifting from experts to commissioners, from regulators to curators, from engagers to foresighters, and from reticulous to storytellers. Now, every year when I teach this course, I have to remind myself what a reticulist is. So, for those of you who, like me, find that to be an unfamiliar term, a reticulist is someone who's kind of like a PR agent or a comms specialist. They are the individuals who kind of set the agenda. They're the manipulators or the influencers of communication. And what Helen and Helen are saying is that we really don't have the space for reticulous, these manipulators or spin doctors so much anymore. What we really need are genuine storytellers. Let's very briefly look through each of these roles. What do we see emerging in contemporary public administration that's operating in a globalized environment? We're seeing a lot more public servants who are responsible for what we call commissioning. So commissioning is where you outsource work, usually to the private sector. And in many instances, this involves hiring in external consultants. And so within the public service now, we need people who are able to respond to this spread of new public management, who can do needs assessments within their departments, who can ensure that the contracting goes well, that they have skills in commercial tendering and contract management, and who can also then see through service delivery and undertake evaluations to make sure that the government is securing value for money. Many of these private consultancy firms do an excellent job, but they also come at a very high price. And so contemporary public administration is seeing an increase in commissioners. The next role that Professor Sullivan and Professor Dickinson point out is this role of curator. So these are individuals who may sit across an entire department, but they are ones who have been there for some time and they bring what we call the organizational memory. They're the guys in the meeting who are able to say, hey, I know that seems like a good idea to you, Phil, but we tried that 12 years ago and it was a spectacular failure. So these are important individuals. They kind of maintain the department or organizational system and values. They're kind of the Jiminy Cricket, the moral compass of the group. And they provide a mix of the old and new. So they really help public servants to remember where they've come from and where they might go. So where should they focus? And they bring some content expertise or area expertise. If you've ever been to a terrific museum exhibition, you'll know what a good curator is. And the example that I always give was several years ago, I was in Nice in the south of France, and I was very lucky to go to the Matisse Museum. And it was just fascinating the way it had been curated because it's in a very small house up on a hill. And when you enter the museum, you're in a small, dark room and most of the paintings are really dark, traditional Renaissance style studies. There's, still lifes of like dead pheasants on tables with oranges, and it's all very serious and very dark. And this was Matisse's early work. And what the curator was attempting to do was just to remind us, to give us this organizational memory that this individual who's known for these massive, bright paper cuts and beautiful, huge artworks actually started out in a very traditional way. And so this curator helps you to remember that by entering this gallery in this small, dark space with these traditional paintings. And then you walk through into the main gallery, and it's just this massive atrium with light and just beautiful, beautiful, brightly colored paintings. And in my mind, because I'm sure all of you are following right along with me, that is the role of a curator in public administration, to remind us of these small dark spaces, but take us out into the light and the bright. A foresighter is also becoming increasingly important. So these are the individuals around the public administration table who are really into future visioning. They're looking at the trends. They're looking at what's coming next. They're often quite concerned with costing and strategy development, and they will usually provide this kind of visionary leadership. So this is what we could be doing. This is where we need to get to. The challenge with foresighters, and we've got a little unicorn over here to remind us, is that they might be really enthusiastic and very interesting and have some great ideas, but they may not always provide practical advice. What we then need are some storytellers who can take the organizational memory of the curators and the big pictures of these foresighters, as well as the work of our more traditional public administrators, the commissioners driving the work, and really put together a narrative. So their job is to build organizational buy-in within public administration, to communicate both internally and externally to quite diverse audiences, and to engage external parties. And so they're not just spin doctors, they're actually people who are there to, I suppose, create a cohesive notion of what public administration is trying to achieve and really take the public along for the journey. Okay, so that's our review for today of the content for the course, the main theories and ideas. So we've moved from new public management through to looking at how new public management in a globalized policy environment has shaped the role of today's public administrators and is actually creating what Helen Dickinson and Helen Sullivan argue are new types of public administration roles. And here we are on this slide with my buddy Taylor, because whenever I think about this, I think big expectations, big expectations. Oh, you and me, we got big expectations. Yeah, if you've never listened to Taylor Swift, you did not get that joke, or you may just be like cringing. Either way, it's my video. So, your expectations for this course. You want to really understand policy and theories. These are the things that you've told me in the live discussion forums and also that I've been receiving through WeChat. You'd like to know a bit about policy and development theories, and obviously in the last 2 lectures we've started on that. We're definitely going to explore governance from a global perspective, And we will, as we've done today, look at this from a variety of scales and levels. So we really will try to meet those expectations. You also have a variety of skills that you'd like to develop. So some people have said, look, I would like to write a policy brief, or I want to understand how to prioritize my time or develop research skills. Those are all things that we'll work with you on. And you're interested in kind of how can I apply this in my real life? So those are also things that we will work on and talk about together. And certainly the assessment tasks in this course aim to help you. And some people have said, and that's totally fine to be pragmatic, actually, I just need to get the course credit and I would like to pass. So good on you. We will try to help you. I have a lot of expectations too, so this is a two-way street. I do ask that you come prepared, so if that means you need to have your coffee beforehand or do whatever you need to do, be ready when we meet for our live online discussion forums. Bring your A game. Be really present. Be here. So we're only online together for a short amount of time, so put your phone away and just be with us and have a good chat. We need to be mutually respectful, so I expect that you will respect each other and also me, that you'll just have a willingness to share and try new things. And certainly with the online format, there are a lot of new things that we need to try. And hopefully overall, my expectation is that you'll just have a really awesome course experience. I'm always committed to ensuring that you're able to learn, that you have a lot of different ways to approach learning, that we provide you with information and feedback in a timely manner, and that the presentation of ideas is really open and inclusive, that you have a chance to be critical and to ask questions, to build your own skills and ideas. So I promise you that I will always do my best to support your learning, and I'll bring my best every time. So to leave you today, and there will be another video instead of slides about assessment 1, what I want to encourage you to do is just to think about 3 things to shape your first assessment. And so these 3 things are, what are you really interested in? What is something that's going to hold your interest for the entire term that you would love to research and to know more about? You might also want to think, where's an issue where you believe that you can make a difference, or it's a place where you want to work in the future. So what is strategically useful to you? These are the 3 questions I really encourage you to consider as you choose your assessment 1 research essay topic, because that will carry through into your assignment 2, where you do a conference presentation and a policy briefing to make recommendations or advice on that issue. So think about what you're interested in. Maybe think about, is this an area where you think if you do some research and ideas, you can make a difference? And also, what is strategically useful to you? Is this something that you can include in a future job application as part of your portfolio? Would learning about a particular issue help you with your master's thesis? Whatever it is, I really encourage you to think strategically about your choice of topic for this assessment. So what I would like you to do in relation to the assessment is go ahead now and think about what your topic ideas are. Take 5 minutes and just quietly sit and think about what is it that you'd really like to study. And then I'd like you, if possible, and I'm sure you're all very good at WeChat, find a friend online. So if you're remote from everyone else and you're feeling a bit isolated, go in the WeChat group and say, hey, would somebody speak to me for 10 minutes? Or maybe you already know someone. Quite a few of you have been in Geneva together. Many of you are still in Beijing together. See if you can catch 10 minutes with a buddy and talk about your topic. Because for next week's live online forum, we're going to ask each of you to do a 1-minute elevator pitch of your topic. So practice your elevator pitch, and it's 1 minute only. So we're coming to the end here. You're hanging in there. We'll try to keep the videos under 45 minutes. What we need to do then is prepare your 60-second elevator pitch for your research assessment essay topic. Read and take notes for this coming Monday's live online discussion forum. Check out our new collaborative Padlet site and respond to the discussion questions and activities. Ensure that you're on our WeChat group or an email list. I think now we're going to stick to WeChat, so if you want to email me, go ahead, and get in touch with any questions or concerns that you may have. So that's it, folks. Thanks for hanging in there. We hope you enjoyed today's discussion, and I really look forward to hearing from you with your ideas about your first assessment topic and what you think of the state of 21st century public administration in our next live online forum. So wherever you are, good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and we'll see you on the internet.